Okay, so good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We have over 350 people registered this evening, so I can see there are 75 on board already, and looking forward to having more join us. Very briefly, my name is Julie Stafford. I'm Director of Development and Alumni Relations at University of Galway, and I just wanted to take this opportunity to welcome everybody here this evening. It's a really special gathering of our alumni community, and just so delighted for everyone to be here for what no doubt will be a very insightful discussion on this very pivotal event in 2024. We live in a world where there are pivotal events, I think, every day now. So it's just great that we're here to discuss this one. A warm welcome to our panel led by Larry Donnelly, a University of Galway lecturer, to Carole Coleman, to John Feehery, and to Marion McKeone. And thank you so much to you all for giving up your time and providing us with your insights and your expertise and your own perspectives on the US presidential election. I encourage everyone to engage. We're going to leave the chat open, so please do engage if you have any questions. Larry will come at the end, and really interested to hear everybody's perspectives and questions about this really interesting debate. So with that said, I will hand over to Larry, and thank you all, and delighted that you can all join us this evening.
Thanks very much, Julie, and thanks for putting this event together, and thanks to everybody who is tuning in. I think this is going to be a fascinating hour or so of your time. And the first thing I want to do is just to introduce my panel of very distinguished guests who I'm really, really grateful to for giving up their time. With us this evening is Marion McKeone, US Correspondent for the Business Post and also a regular voice on the Irish airwaves. In particular, I highly recommend her weekly joust with Cal Thomas on Matt Cooper's radio program every Tuesday. We're also joined by Carole Coleman, RTÉ journalist, former Washington correspondent for the network, who many will remember engaged in, how shall I say it, a spirited interview with then President George W. Bush back then. And she also does some teaching about journalism students in the University of Galway. And last but certainly not least, John Feehery is a partner at EFB Advocacy in Washington, D.C., a longtime staffer to the House Republican leadership before that, a columnist with The Hill, and also of note is that John studied in 2 summer programs at the University of Galway a couple of years ago, I think we'll say. So with that, I'm really happy to have them all with us. We're going to do 6 segments, okay? We're going to look at how Americans elect a president. We're going to talk about the Electoral College. We're going to look at the 2 candidates themselves. We're going to look at the big issues. We're going to look at after Labor Day, that is in the closing days, what do our panel expect might happen, including what third-party candidates, what role they might play in this election. And I'm also going to put them on the hot seat to get some predictions as to what they think this election, how it might go. Lastly, we'll look at the consequences. And I think everyone knows that the consequences of this election are going to be very serious, regardless of who wins, the consequences for the United States and the wider world. And lastly, as Julie indicated, we're going to kick it open to you for a couple of questions. I know there are many people attending. I know you have a lot of interest here, so people will probably be disappointed, but I'll pick a couple questions at random and put them to the panel. Okay, so we're going to move relatively quickly. And again, I'm sure it's going to be a fascinating discussion. So without any further ado, the rather thankless task of discussing the Electoral College and explaining what it means and how it works has fallen to Carole Coleman. And I'm going to ask Carole just to give a brief explanation of the Electoral College and how it works. What I always say to people here is that the best way to think of an American election is it's not just one election, it's actually 51 elections, the 50 states and the District of Columbia. But I'll pass it over to Carole. So Carole, please take our audience through the Electoral College.
Thanks, Larry, and good evening, alumni. So a lot of you may know this already, but the Electoral College is the system that was devised 240 years ago, basically, at the Constitutional Convention for electing the US president. So you go into your polling booth in your state and you cast your ballot by marking your box for your ticket of choice, be that Biden, Harris, or Trump, and whoever he decides to run with. But you are not voting directly for these candidates. You're voting for a slate of electors who will then meet a few weeks down the road, usually in December, and cast their ballots supposedly on your behalf for the president and vice president. So we all know there are 538 electoral college votes, and to win, the presidential candidate must achieve at least 270. So that's half of the 538 plus one. Now, each state, as Larry says, 51 different elections, each state has a different number of electors. So it goes all the way from the largest, California, with 54, right down to the smallest District of Columbia and the Dakotas with just 3. It's a winner takes all situation. So whichever ticket wins the popular vote in the state, they get all of that state's electoral college votes. So take, for example, a swing state that we're going to see a lot about, Arizona. It has 11 electoral college votes. Who are these electors? Each of the candidates who will be running on the ballot in Arizona will have to put forward 11 elector names who will be those electors down the road for them. Then whoever wins the popular vote in the state, say for example Donald Trump wins Arizona, he'll then summon his 11 electors who will then meet in the state capital in December to cast ballots for him. Now, it can get a bit squirrely because it has happened that these electors, even though they're pledged to vote for that candidate, for the party candidate, some of them have gone rogue and voted for other candidates who are on the ballot. It doesn't happen very often, it's very rare, and it has never really affected the outcome of an election yet. But there's always mischief to come. So on election night, when you see that big map with the Electoral College and all those numbers, that's what we're talking about here. And I suppose the last thing to say about it, which I know the other panelists will expand upon, is that you can win the Electoral College without winning the overall popular vote. I think that's enough, Larry.
That's admirably succinct. Very well done. Better than I could have done, that's for sure. I think that's a nice segue, and I'll go to you, Marion. I think I'm not putting words in your mouth, but I think it's safe to say you would have critiques to offer of the Electoral College system.
I think that would be safe to say, Larry. And well done, Carole. Wow, you got it all in there in 90 seconds. Yeah, my first one I'm going to start with, and this may sound sweeping, but you would not, I believe, have had the January 6th attacks if there was no Electoral College. I can't see why you would have, because that whole mechanism that Donald Trump was trying to use, fake electors, all this kind of thing, to get Mike Pence to send back electors to various states. None of that would have happened if you had just had what every other country, democracy in the world has, basically, that the person who wins the most votes wins an election. And, maybe back in 1740, I know Alexander Hamilton and the Federalist Papers, and they thought that this would prevent, ironically, sort of populist, sort of mob leaders from becoming president. It seems to be having the opposite effect. And I think if you look at it, and I'm just going to give one really quick example here, California and Wyoming. Okay, California has about 39 million people living there. It has 54 electoral college votes. Wyoming has about 580,000 people. It has 3 electoral college votes. So basically, every vote in Wyoming is worth 3.5 times the vote of a Californian. Now, as somebody who spends a lot of time in California, I find that very upsetting. I think that every vote should be worth the same in every state. And also, I think you wouldn't have this crazy swing state situation where the candidates spend all of their time in a handful of states because they're gaming the Electoral College Board. So I think it's profoundly undemocratic. I think it has no place in this day and age. And I also think that if Republicans had, in less than 2 decades, won the popular vote twice, but lost the election because of the Electoral College, I think there would be no more Electoral College. It really is skewed towards the red states, and I think the Republican candidates. And I say that objectively. It's not, if you just look at it based on the votes and on the way it works.
I'm chomping at the bit to jump in, but I'll let John respond to Marion's comments.
Well, listen, I think the Electoral College was designed to allow each state to have a big impact on the election. It was really a guarantee for the small states to have an outsized portion of the election. And I think that Marion points that out, that this is what binds the United States together in many ways. It's a collection of 50 states in the District of Columbia. And this is what the founders decided to do. And it was a last minute compromise that the founders came up with, because they could figure out no other way to get all the states on board, the 13 colonies on board, to come together and come up with a system to allow really kind of rural states to have as much of a voice in the elections as big states, and especially big cities. And I think that it works. It works because these candidates have to go to all kinds of different places in the country. And I'll give you an example. They have to, Joe Biden has a very good chance of winning an electoral vote in Nebraska. That could be the game changer, could be that one electoral vote, because Nebraska has decided to give one of their electoral votes to the area around its biggest city, Omaha. And so that gives the candidates a reason to campaign in different parts of the country. Otherwise, people would just campaign in California, New York, and Chicago. Listen, I think that many years ago, we heard about this electoral blue wall, that there's no way that the Republicans could ever break through the Democrats' electoral college blue wall. Well, that's not what has turned out to happen. And we've had competitive elections on the electoral college for the last 30 years that I can remember. I think this election is going to also be very, very close, be 50-50. And I think you can see 270 votes for 271 votes even for the eventual winner. So, this is the American system. As someone who's lived in America for 60 years, we like the system, especially if you're a Republican. And, frankly, I'm less concerned about what people who are not from America think about it, to be honest with you.
Okay. Carole, what do you say to that point? And, having spent your time there, the Electoral College binds the United States. It brings it together. It's not a disuniter.
Yeah, I do get that point that John made there. And there is a danger, I suppose, that candidates would just concentrate on the larger states if it weren't there. And he gives the example there of Nebraska. From a purely, I suppose, selfish point of view, I just think it's great fun on election night. So I'd hate to see it go. But I can see, given that it is, from 1787 was the Constitutional Convention, and the reasons for doing it was because they didn't want the Congress picking the president. They wanted to balance out the small and the large states. I can see how that has endured for so long. But now, where we are now, with, I suppose, we saw Hillary Clinton winning the popular vote in 2016, but Donald Trump winning the presidency. We saw George W. Bush winning the presidency in 2000, but Al Gore winning the popular vote. I think it is harder for people to get their heads around how that makes sense anymore. So I think both of the speakers have really good points there. But on balance, I suppose things happen so slowly, but I can see a growing movement probably in the States to maybe change how that works. We always saw that the blue on either side of the map. The red states seem to be favored by the Electoral College, but as John has pointed out, that has changed to a certain extent. We saw Clinton getting the blue on either side of the map, and now it's just a little bit more all over the place where we look at where those swing states are. So I don't know. I think I'd probably want to keep it too, just for purely selfish reasons. That I just love watching it on election night.
Okay, we'll move on from the systemic issue, and we'll go to the two candidates. And for an awful lot of people, both in the United States and looking on from afar, this is proving to be the rematch that nobody wants. Some 70% of Americans say that they wish neither of these individuals were the Republican or Democratic nominee. So I want to put it to you, Marion. How did we get here?
It really is a mystery, isn't it? I think, and I wonder, you're right, 70% keep saying, oh God, not this again, please no. But yet, if you look at the primary voting patterns, they suggest that they're both saying, actually, yes, we do in each party. I think there's emerging talent in both parties. I think that this will be the last election of two old white guys, really. I think that we're seeing a deeper bench coming in, I think, on both sides. And I think that it's just unfortunate. I really believe Joe Biden made a big error in not being a one-term president. And I remember, I think it would have been in 2020, and being in Detroit where he spoke, and he said that he was going to pass on the baton to the next generation, and he really I felt ran on being a one-term guy, because I saw him in early in 2020. He was a dreadful campaigner. If it hadn't been for Jim Clyburn, he would have been left in the dust, really, because his showing was so weak early on on the primary trail. So I think that we're here because Joe Biden decided he wanted a second term, as is his right. The Democrats did very, very well in the midterms. There was, there's no reason to suspect that he is going to do well. There are reasons, actually, but less well than anybody else. And Donald Trump, of course, sees himself as the incumbent, as the guy who never went away, because he was never defeated. And every single Donald Trump supporter that I've spoken to around the country all really see him as an incumbent. And they were very angry at people within their own party, even for having a primary at all, because they feel he won in 2020. He beat Joe Biden. The election was stolen. And why should he even have to go through the pretext for primary in the first place? So I think that's how we have it. We have one old guy who said, I'll do one term, and then said, nah, maybe not. And then we have another old guy who's saying, I won, even though I suspect he knows he didn't. And he's coming back. Also, let's call a spade here. Donald Trump needs to run and needs to win, because there's a very good chance that if he doesn't win, he's going to be facing all kinds of criminal jeopardy and all kinds of pain as a result. So his best chance of heading off the legal complications that he faces, to use a polite word, is to win the election and then to stall the ball on the federal cases.
Yeah, really, really interesting point. John, you're a conservative, you're a Republican. I mean, the question, that I always wonder is, to what do you attribute this stranglehold on the loyalty of the conservative faithful that Donald Trump has? I mean, from my own point of view, it would have made an awful lot more sense this time around to pick a messenger who would continue on with Trump's policies, et cetera, yet do away with the baggage. Somebody like, for instance, Ron DeSantis, and nobody else caught fire. Trump just crushed them all. To what do you attribute that personal as well as, I suppose, ideological loyalty?
Well, I think Marion's exactly right. They're both incumbents. This is one of the rare moments in our history where you have two incumbents running against one another. Trump is overwhelmingly popular with the Republican base, and he got a head start on his campaign. Everyone knew he was running, and even though he had a kind of a disastrous announcement, it was a very flat speech and didn't inspire a lot of excitement. And he has all of these court cases running against him, so you would think that that would have slowed him down. But what we saw with the polls, at least, is every time there was a new court case launched against Trump, his poll ratings would go up by 10 points. And there was just this general sense that he had won the election amongst the Republican faithful. And it was kind of a restoration of Trump from a defeat that many Republicans didn't really accept. And so, you have, and from a Biden perspective, he did a very good job of keeping anyone serious off the ballot. I mean, it's not that hard to beat. Marion, what's her name, Williamson? I can't remember her name. Yeah. She was kind of a joke candidate. And, the only one who really ran against Biden effectively was kind of the protest vote on Hamas. That was the only thing that kind of caught fire as a protest against Biden. So you really do have a historic moment here where two incumbents are running against one another. Both, I think, they have the claim to the throne, and it's probably not a surprise that the two candidates that no one wants are the two candidates that we're going to get, because of the power of incumbencies.
Carole, just reflecting on what I would argue has been really a realignment of the Republican Party in the years between your time in the United States and now, whereas we had President George W. Bush, someone who saw a big role for the United States in the world, someone who was, relatively speaking, pro-immigration, pro-free trade. The Republican Party has pivoted hugely in the intervening years. Do you have any sense why that might be the case, or what's caused that move?
Oh my God, that's a difficult question. Well, I suppose right throughout the history of the United States, we've seen the parties pivot back and forward, particularly the Democrats in the South and everything. But I think the immigration issue really has galvanized it. Because if you think of Trump, I suppose one of his strongest issues is probably immigration, and probably one of Biden's weakest ones, even though he's trying to make a few moves on it now. The other thing I would say about Trump and the Republican Party as well, like any party, there's probably a big tent there. There's a lot of people wanting a lot of things. And he seems to be pretty, to me anyway, he seems to be pretty, you know, good at holding the finger in the wind and saying, I'll go this way or I'll go that way to keep people happy, you know. So he's good at that as well. But yeah, I think the immigration thing has been huge. And I think Trump's message the first time he ran in 2016, that your jobs are all being taken by China and the, you know, Chinese goods coming in here and everything. You know, I identified with that, having lived in America. I couldn't understand how every single thing that I took up said made in China on it. It didn't seem right, a country that size. And sometimes you kind of went, what does America make? Pizza? I mean, it was like, there was definitely an anger there that what has happened to this great country. And I think he really galvanized that. And I think Republicans were kind of moving, they were thinking along those same lines as well, you know. But we'll get on to talking about the other issues, so I don't want to wander into them. So that's kind of it. But nobody likes either candidate. They're both deeply unpopular, you know. So even though they're two incumbents, they're two deeply unpopular incumbents. But as Hillary Clinton says, get over yourselves. That's what we've got.
Hey, Larry, can I jump in real quick on this?
Sure, do. Yeah.
I would say that Trumpism is a rejection of Bushism. And I think that people really don't understand how unpopular George Bush was for a variety of factors: the failed Iraq War, the financial crisis, the housing crisis, the hollowing out of the middle class because of Chinese jobs, the opioid crisis that a lot of people blamed on Bush, and also this kind of general sense that Bush kind of represented the elite, and there was generally a rejection by Trump of the political elite, that because he was the non-politician, and you know that it was George Bush is now probably more closely associated with his friendship with Barack Obama than he is with the Republican base. Now there are a lot of Bush people who are now with Donald Trump or still Republican, but I would venture to say that George W. Bush probably would not be voting for Donald Trump in this election, and I'm not sure if Donald Trump wants his vote.
Yeah, no, very fair point. Before we do go into the issues, I want to go to Marion, because I think this is something that people who are in the audience will be interested to hear. Obviously, as you've chronicled many times on the airwaves and in the Business Post, Trump faces a litany of different legal troubles. If you had to pinpoint from a political point of view, what is the most troublesome for him right now as he goes into the election? What is potentially the most troublesome aspect of his legal problems?
Well, I think just because we know it's going to go ahead, or it's virtually certain to go ahead next week, I think that the New York case, the New York State case, and I think that this is 34. Look, there's a lot of debate about whether or not this should have been brought at all. It's 34 felony charges, and they're sort of barely really they could have been just misdemeanor charges almost as easily in some respects. But this case, because we know it's going to go ahead, the judge, Donald Trump, has really pushed his luck with this judge, as he has with other judges. There are gagging orders in place, and it's a tawdry tale. It brings back up the paying of hush money to a porn actress, Stormy Daniels, and Michael Cohen will be in the mix. Apparently Hope Hicks, who was Trump's that he was very, very close to as an aide, she's going to be testifying against him, which I was surprised, and a number of other people as well. And I think it just reminds people of the ick factor. I don't think it's going to cost him votes necessarily, because the Trump vote, and I can't say this strongly enough, is non-transferable. Nobody's going to get the Trump vote. Not Robert F. Kennedy Jr., certainly not Joe Biden. People who don't love Trump within the Republican Party, the Nikki Haley voters, will probably stay home. Some might go with Kennedy, but by and large, they're not going to vote for Biden either. So I think that if this will go ahead for 6 to 8 weeks. He will more likely than not be convicted. It is happening in New York and Manhattan. And I think then that if the other case goes ahead, which we don't know if it will or not, the January 6th case, I think that that could be very devastating for Trump if it happens before November. But the signs are at the moment that it won't happen before November. And the signs are also in large part due to inexplicable lack of professionalism from Fani Willis in Georgia, that case won't go ahead either. And certainly Aileen Cannon in Miami shows no inclination to have that case tried before November 3rd. So I think you have all of these cases. I think the American people should have the right to hear the evidence, because Donald Trump may be acquitted. They should have the right to hear the evidence, to hear it play out, and to be able to factor in the jury's conclusion. It looks like, as I said, the only case where that will happen will be in New York. It may be very possibly, if the Supreme Court comes back, the arguments are taking place on April, I think, 25th. The last day for them to deliver their ruling on that would be June 4th, unless they say they're going to wait until next term to do it. But even if they deliver on June 4th, it's presidential immunity. As far as I can see, there's no case there. There's no legal case. It's a delaying tactic. But I think it will be very, very hard for Tanya Chutkan to get that case up and running if they come back with a favorable opinion to Jack Smith on the 4th of June. It's very hard to see how they can squeeze it in. But, we'll see. And I think if you have Trump, because we've never had this before, a president, a candidate as defendant who's in a criminal courtroom day in, day out, and the number of people who have said in exit polls during the primaries, if he's convicted, basically, we're talking Republicans here, bets are off for a third of Republicans have said they will not vote for a convicted candidate. And that was where Nikki Haley, of course, was the other option. Where will that vote go if he is convicted? They might just stay home.
Okay. I want to move into the issues. John, if you want to respond to anything that Marion has said today, please do. But I do want to get into the issues with you. And in principle, the big one, everyone says it's the economy stupid. And it seems to me that there are two conflicting narratives out there about the economy, and I think specifically about inflation. One is that President Biden has done a reasonably good job with the economy. That is, a lot of the figures and statistics are actually pretty good. But on the other hand, and more important in my view, politically, is the perception. And the perception is that things are not going well, and the widespread negativity. Which one of those is going to win out in the end? That is the reality of the economic numbers. Can Biden do a job of selling that? Or the perception of negativity around inflation, and is that going to win out?
Well, first of all, on Marion's point, she's exactly right. I do think that the one thing that is going to cause some problems for Trump is that big fine and how he pays that money, because a lot of money, and it actually hurt him with raising money with big donors, because they didn't want the money they're giving to Trump to pay off the fine. Listen, I think I would put it's inflation versus the stock market, and if you have enough stock market holdings, you're generally pleased with how much they've increased, and probably inflation doesn't bother you that much. But if you're someone who doesn't have a lot of money, inflation is what goes up doesn't necessarily come down, because it has not come down, and prices are sky high, and they seem to only get higher. And people are blaming Joe Biden for that. And I do think that that issue in particular, all the talking about how great the economy is, how many jobs we have, and all those things, the silent killer for any politician is when prices are so high for food, mortgages, and just the basics of getting by, that they can't they have to work 2 jobs or 3 jobs. And for a lot of folks I think this is actually really hurting him with working class voters of all colors and creeds. I think it hurts Black voters. I think it hurts Hispanic voters. It hurts middle class and working class white voters. And the lower you are on the education scale, the more the inflation really takes a bite out of everything that you're doing. And so I do think that the economy and the sudden rise of inflation is not good for Joe Biden, and him cheerleading the numbers is not really having an impact, because people are still paying way too much for the basics that they need to do every month to stay alive.
Absolutely. There's an awful lot in that, but again, the time is moving quicker than I'd like it to move. I want to go to Marion just on another issue, and it's largely because you do travel so much around the United States. And what has struck me watching from afar, even in places like Iowa, New Hampshire, the huge concern about the immigration issue. And how many Americans are saying this is the most important, not just conservatives, but Americans of all stripes, saying that this is the most important issue for them. How big do you think it's going to be in the election? And does Biden have any counterpunch against Trump's really, I suppose, straightforward arguments about immigration?
Yeah, keep them out. Yeah. You know, it's amazing. And in the places, as you said, in Iowa, but also in New York, in Colorado, which is really, it used to be purple, it's a blue state now. But one of the things, a couple of things that have happened around the immigration issue are the Texas governor, Greg Abbott, who has turned it into a war, effectively, almost. And he has been busing up tens of thousands of immigrants to New York, to Denver, to what they call sanctuary cities. And so they've been set. So what you have, and it's really affecting people. Chicago is another place where I've spoken to Democrats who are furious with Joe Biden over this. New York Democrats, as I say, in Chicago, that's as blue as it comes. Democrats, Denver Democrats, they say, you know, they're walking out of their houses in cities, like, as I say, and there are tents everywhere with these immigrants because there's nowhere for them to go. There's overflow. So the homeless people who already, there are big problems with homelessness in all of these cities, in every city in America now, they can't get the resources that they need to get housed or to get what they're looking for. And a lot of Americans now, and they're not right, but it certainly seems this way, they believe that these people are coming in and they're being sent into their cities and they're taking all the resources that should belong to them. And people in democratic cities are just as angry as people in Republican cities. But I think what Abbott has done in this thing where they want to allow Texan police and law enforcement to be able to arrest people who come in without papers, undocumented crossers, and that there will be no asylum rights, etc. They're really trying to turn this into a big war ahead of the election. And I think Abbott is very much Trump's proxy on this. And I think he's really doing this for Trump's benefit. Now, what can Joe Biden do? Okay, they did try, and I think it was quite smart what they tried to do, which was to say, okay, we have a bipartisan bill here. Look, this is the toughest immigration bill that we've had in 4 decades. Jim Langford co-authored it with Chris Murphy and a couple of other people. It's giving you everything you want, as in you Republicans in Congress. Now all you got to do is sign it, and they refused to do so. And Mike Johnson wouldn't bring it to the floor. Had he done so, it would have taken away the strongest issue for Trump, which is the border's a mess, we don't have a country anymore, etc., etc. So I think Biden thought, well, we can say, look, we had a solution and you turned your back on it. But that's a bit like turning a very big ship. And the very big ship is the Republican immigration ship, because they kind of own that issue. And I think Donald Trump has a bigger and more effective megaphone on this. And as you say, it's every state has, they are really concerned about immigration. And I think, people talk about abortion and other issues that are important. Yes, I believe they are, but I'm not seeing the same level. People vote when they're angry. And I'm not seeing the same level, really, honestly, even on the abortion issue, of anger as I am in all these states I've been to, as I am on immigration, where people are just furious about it.
Yeah. Interesting you bring up abortion, because I want to go that direction with Carole now, as somebody who wrote a book called Alleluia, America, at one stage. Carole, I suppose one of the dividing lines, and there are a number of them, we'll talk about more, but differences between the United States and certainly Western Europe is the extent to which people vote on cultural issues in the United States. Now, since the reversal of Roe versus Wade, arguably the abortion issue is a big motivating one for the Democratic Party, and now has turned into a win for them. Against that, however, there are other new fronts in the culture war are around things like gender identity and other issues. How are these going to play out in the election?
Oh my God. Well, I think with the abortion, I think there is a lot of latitude for Biden to speak to women directly on this, women who are going to be worried about it. And like I've been reading a lot about sort of the non-religious women in America who don't identify with any religious group, that they are quite strong on this, and that they're almost kind of forming a group in the same way as the Christian evangelicals would have formed a group when they were lobbying for this. It's going down their agenda slightly because they've got what they want. But now you've got all these women. I think I read where there's about 25 million women of that age who would be in the States, where it's now much harder to get an abortion. So if Joe Biden can kind of latch onto them and get them, voting on that issue, and voting down the ticket, because it's the states that, in the end of the day, that are making their individual laws now. I think we will see a lot of women coming out on that issue. On the culture wars, I was just in Florida actually there a few weeks ago, and I did a little piece on Disney versus DeSantis, which was where Disney had kind of spoke out against the so-called "Don't Say Gay" bill that DeSantis had brought in. And it was really interesting. I mean, I did find a lot of support for the ideas that were in that, which was basically, people told me, to prevent like grade school kids from learning about pornography. Like even inside Disney, which was supposedly so super woke, I spoke to people working in there who said, yeah, that Disney had overstepped the mark and that DeSantis was right to push back. So definitely found a lot of support for that. But I was noticing then that when DeSantis kind of went out of the state and headed for the primaries around America, he sank, and it just didn't seem to be an issue at all, at least in those early primaries. And people then started saying in Florida, oh, maybe he went a bit too far with all this book banning stuff and that, and now he's rowing back a little bit. So I definitely think there is a pushback against woke, but I'm not sure that it's going to be the massive issue that we expect it to be. I really do think that the economy, and I've paid $9 for an ice cream in Yonkers and been absolutely floored by it. I would not vote for that. And I think, seriously, yeah. And the immigration thing, I think, is just huge as well, because immigration is not going to stop. We see it in Ireland. I was just down at that tent city the other day in Dublin. They're coming from Palestine, people who've lost their families. They're coming from South Africa, people who are paid $20 an hour. It's not going to stop. So until somebody really figures out the solution to that, I think Trump is going to be on the winning side of that one.
Okay. Now, here's one I want to hear from all three of you on. I'll stay with you, Carole, just for the moment. It's obviously it's in the news and in the headlines here, and there's a lot of outrage here in Ireland about it, and that is the situation in Gaza. And, in the United States, talk about differences in how things are perceived versus in the United States versus in Western Europe. I saw some opinion polling recently which said that 38% of Americans think that the way Israel has prosecuted the war is absolutely fine. That is, they approve of how Israel has conducted business. If you did a poll like that here, I don't think you'd get 3%. To support it. So maybe just, do a little bit of scene sketching in that context, because I think there is some sentiment here that says there's a dramatic sea shift in American public opinion on Israel. I'm just not so sure that that's there, or that it's as strong as some people in this part of the world think.
Yeah, I didn't detect it when I was there a few weeks ago either, but then things hadn't got as bad as they did like in recent weeks, and particularly with the killing of the aid workers. But a tiny little personal story here. Years ago, about 20 years ago, when I was working as the Washington correspondent, I was doing my piece to camera, as they called it, on a roof in New York with the lovely skyline in the background. And I was looking at this guy who was at another camera position, and I was saying to him, I know that face. I know that face. I don't know where I know him from. Very kind of suave and all the rest of it. And the next thing, I obviously was staring a little too hard, and he winked at me. So I turned around to the camera person I was working with, and I said, who is that guy? And he goes, oh, that's Bibi Netanyahu. Yeah, seriously, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I've kind of been thinking about it a lot in recent months, thinking if I had the chance again to be standing across from him and him winking at me, what I would like to say to him, But I do think that young people in America, I think they do think differently than their parents on this, because Bibi's been there for those 20 years. He's been the media darling. He's been the representative of Israel. I don't know how long more he will be, because they're calling for elections over there, and I don't really see him surviving that. But I do think young people are changing. Arab Americans obviously, have their take on it. So I think it will make a difference, but it's going to be slow, because the older Americans, and I heard some of them talking when I was over there too, they're just, still drinking that particular Kool-Aid that we're Israel's friend and we must stick with them no matter what.
John.
Well, listen, I think that the political implications of what's going on in Gaza are overrated in the United States. I don't think most voters are going to vote on it, and they have much bigger concerns, which have been, I would rank them as inflation, immigration, and abortion are the three things that are going to drive most people to the polls. But it does have niche audiences that care. And for example, this could be really devastating for Biden in Michigan, because there is a fairly large Arab community that has lost faith in Biden, and that you've seen Biden change his posture because of worries about losing Michigan. Obviously, with Jewish voters in the United States, the more observant Jews are the ones who care, are much more deeply supportive of Bibi and the current Israeli incursion into Gaza, war in Gaza. Whereas less observant Jews, secular Jews, are much more, want the war in Gaza to stop. They're calling for a full ceasefire. I think that from a political perspective, Republicans are much more hardcore in Congress, pro-Israel, than even Trump is. And Trump himself has said, this needs to stop. We need to get this cleaned up quickly. And he's been, and I think that the other perception here, and this goes to not only Israel, but also Ukraine, the idea of who could be a strong, effective leader that can get these wars to stop. And I think that Biden doesn't get points on the strength factor. I think that Trump largely does with a lot of voters. And I think that all these kind of blow-ups in many ways do help Trump. But from a political perspective, I don't think that most voters are voting on Gaza and Israel. I think most voters are voting on pocketbook issues that they care mostly about.
Marion, quickly on that one.
Very quickly, I agree with John by and large, but where this will count, and as John said, where it could be devastating, is you've got about 2.2 million Arab American voters. About 2/3 of those are Christian, 1/3 is Muslim. You've also got about 3.5 million Muslims in America. So if you figure Joe Biden won Michigan by 154,000 votes in 2020. Now, about 220,000 Arab Americans voted in that election, and they voted overwhelmingly for Joe Biden. He cannot afford to lose a single vote in Michigan. There are also a lot of Arab American voters in Pennsylvania and in Wisconsin, and even in Georgia, which he won by 50,000-60,000 votes. There are about that many in Georgia. So given that this election is going to be decided by 6 states, it's going to be Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia. Okay, so, and in 4 of those 6 states, well, 3 certainly, there are significant Arab American votes. This could cost him, he could pay very dearly for this, and he hasn't handled it well, because he's been saying one thing and doing another, and he's talking about all these judicious leaks about how Bibi's this and that, but then he keeps going around the houses to send more arms and weapons to him. So I think he hasn't handled it well, and he's really enraged the Arab American and the Muslim communities on this, and if he pays a price, it will be in the states he can least afford to pay a price in. So I would be concerned if I were him.
Yeah, absolutely. You stole my thunder there, because everyone talks about Michigan, but you mentioned Pennsylvania, and I don't think Biden can win the race unless he wins Pennsylvania.
He can't. Yeah, there's no way.
Large Arab American community there. Absolutely. Okay. We do have to go into what I'm calling lightning round here, because the time is really against us. So what I want to ask, and I'll stay with you for now, Marion, I'll put it to the other two. there's the old saying that these races don't really heat up until after Labor Day, until after the first Monday in September. From each of you, quickly, one thing you're going to be looking for in September, whether it's a surprise, whether it's something you expect, what's the one thing you're going to be looking for as the election day gets nearer?
I think the number of ballots that Robert F. Kennedy gets on, if he goes Libertarian and gets on all the states or 38 of the states, that could make a big difference. I think we always have the surprises. Will Donald Trump go to trial before, I mean, and by that I mean the January 6th trial. Will that happen beforehand? And then we always have the October surprises, but now we're getting them in March, April, May, June, July. So I think there are always unknowns. Then we have the health of both these candidates. They are both older men. Either one of them could, I kid you not, I asked a Republican on Capitol Hill quite a while ago what their plan was to keep Trump out of 24, and he said a stray golf ball to the head. I mean, so this was not a Trump supporter, by the way, but like if something were to happen to either of these candidates, then what would happen? As I said, they're both elderly men, and they seem to be in pretty good health overall, but you don't know. And I think that there are so many. What happens, I think, with Israel, and there is a saying in foreign policy, it'll never win you an election, but it can lose you one. And I guess the swing states and the Arab American vote is an example there. So I've given you too many, Larry. I'm sorry, but there are a lot of things to watch out for.
I'll see if John and Carole have any others. John.
Well, yeah, thanks for taking everything.
Sorry, John.
I think that first of all, the debates, whether they Trump and Biden decide to go for a debate, I think Donald Trump lost the election because of his first debate with Biden. He had COVID. He acted like a complete jerk, and I think it killed him with female voters who said, "I can't deal with this dude," and they turned against him on that particular debate. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the debates. And I do also think that will Republicans embrace early voting, or will they decide to reject it? And early voting is a great way to make sure you get your voters out, and Republicans, I think, are going to get on board with that. But Trump's efforts to stop early voting and kind of denigrate it really hurt him in the election, and it's still not clear where he is on that.
Yeah. Carole?
Yeah, I'm going with voting as well, and any issues relating to ballots and voting, to be honest, whether they be mail-ins, whether there's more of them, less of them. I'm just looking at the fact that, each state basically is in charge of its own voting system. And this is where a lot of the problems arose last time with, Trump claiming this in Georgia and that in Arizona or whatever. And because it's going to be so tight, I do think that we're going to hear an awful lot about people not allowed to vote, being, discriminated against, not allowed to polling stations, not allowed to get their registrations, their ballots. And then just, I suppose, the unexpected. There's a lot of talk in the last week only of likely terrorist attacks. Even Joe Biden was saying last week that Iran was planning something. Emmanuel Macron was saying that Russia's probably going to be trying to target the Paris Olympics. So anything could happen that could really change things round again, and maybe have people say, oh, we better stick with the horse that we have if in a situation like that, as what happened with 9/11.
Okay. Now here's I told you I was going to put each of you on the spot. This is a 2-word answer from each one of you. Again, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what's going to happen in the coming months. But if the election were tomorrow, who do you think would be the next president of the United States? Carole, I'll start with you. 2-word answer.
Joe Biden. John.
Trump.
Marion.
Turnout. I think it all depends on turnout. It's 2 words.
Only because I like you, I'll let you get away with that. The last thing I want to touch on a serious note, and if you each want to take it, and again in 2 minutes or less, because I want to put some of the questions that the audience have put to you. But consequences here, obviously the consequences are going to be big. Consequences of a Trump or a Biden victory. Marion, if you give 60 seconds to each maximum.
Well, I think, okay, let's start with Biden. He has laid down some very strong legislation. He has put the country in a place to really do very well economically for the future. You know, the Infrastructure Act and the CHIPS Act, all of these things. So I think if we have another 4 years of Biden, we'll have no drama. He's had the same cabinet except for two people, Ron Klain, who no chief of staff lasts longer than 2 years, and his Labour secretary. So with Biden, I don't think people appreciate the absence of drama, that this is a really good, efficient cabinet that gets on with it, that does their jobs. There's no infighting, there's no disunity that we see. And so I think we would have a pretty even keel next 4 years. Not everybody is going to love what he does, of course. You know, not everybody wants student loan forgiveness, etc. But I think it will be okay. With Trump, it'll be more of the same. It will be volatility, chaos. He may do some things okay, but I think you have a real problem with, if you listen to what Trump is telling us, that's where I see the problem, that this is going to be the retribution term, that he's going to go after all these so-and-sos who went after him. He's going to put them all in prison. He said the January 6th committee should all be imprisoned. You have this Project 2025 where you have his far-right supporters who are suggesting that the president of the United States should be able to control the Fed, should be able to control the Department of Justice, that all of these agencies should be directly under the president's control. And if Trump does that, then I think you have a really, a recipe for a pretty quasi-authoritarian state. I also think that immigration, will he round up 10 million people and deport them in mass? I don't think he can. I don't think the logistics are there, but I think it will create an atmosphere of fear and divisiveness. So I think that, and then what will happen with NATO, with Ukraine? You know, he says that he'll fix the war in 24 hours. Well, that's just Trump, isn't it? You know, he says that about everything. He would certainly stop funding, which means that he could pave the way for a Putin victory, for sure. That might end the war, but it won't end. You know, Ukraine is never going to stop fighting Russia. In my belief, whether it's decades, you know, it will never stop, you know, pushing back. So I think, as I say, you will have a competent, technocratic, uninspiring leader in Joe Biden for another 4 years, or you will have that chaos and that anger. And also, Trump Mark I, he had some pretty decent people in his cabinet. He had the Jim Mattis, he had people like that. This time round, you know, what are we going to have Steve Miller for Homeland Security? Like, what kind of crazies are going to be running the asylum this time? I kind of shudder to think.
Okay, John.
Well, listen, I think that you'll have, if Trump wins, you'll have the economy recover. I think you'll have energy prices, the war on energy will stop and energy prices will start sinking. You'll have a lot less, hopefully, it all depends on who actually is appointed, but you'll have a lot less spending at the federal level, new spending at the federal level, at least. I think that you'll see a lot of these green energy programs be discontinued, and you'll kind of return to traditional energy sources. And the international level, I think you'll see. I think you'll see a peace agreement in Russia and Ukraine that will probably look somewhat like the Russian areas of the Donbass will kind of be Russian, and there'll be some sort of peace agreement reached. I think you'll stop. I think Trump will find a way to end the Gaza war, which hopefully will be ended by then. I think you'll see that they will be much more really a continuation of the China policies, which will really try to continue the transition to home shoring for a lot of the industries that are kind of really we are with China. Most of our stuff is made in China, so we've got to figure out a way to get more of that stuff made in the United States and other countries because we're beholden to them. And then you will see when it comes to NATO, if the NATO countries will have more pressure on them to increase their defense expenditures, and which I think is relatively a good thing. And I do think that you'll see. I would predict that you will find a trade agreement with the UK and the United States. I think that's in the future. I know that what Marion is saying is right. There's going to be a lot of drama with Trump because there's always drama with Trump. He loves the drama. He embraces it. I would also say, though, that with Biden, we've had plenty of drama and not good drama with Biden. And I think that I'll be happy to see the Biden administration depart the stage.
Okay, Carole?
Well, okay. I'd like to hear what you think, Larry. I think if Biden wins, Trump would call foul again, and the whole electoral system will kind of be, I suppose, torn apart in an effort to kind of maybe prove stolen election. And I can see where that is coming from. I know they said last time they concluded there was nothing stolen about it, but looking even perfunctorily at how this works, I can see where this is coming from, and I had relatives who used to tell me in Chicago, oh, the Daily stole the elections every year, every time, so this stuff does go on, I think, so I think we'll see an awful lot more about that. We'll have old man watch, of course, whichever one of them it is. And I think with Biden, we'll have, like Marion said, I suppose, a bit more continuity and that idea of the steady hand, particularly when it comes to foreign policy, even though he has had his disasters as well in terms of Gaza and Afghanistan. If Trump wins, I mean, I do see most of us being distracted by the man rather than the job and his own issues with his court cases and all the rest of it. I do see the attempts or the talk of dismantling federal institutions like the IRS and the Treasury and stuff like that. Not sure it's going to happen, but we'll see an awful lot of talk about it. And I do worry slightly, I suppose, about foreign entities or foreign countries kind of manipulating Donald Trump a little bit more than maybe they could manipulate Joe Biden. Because again, he will be looking for kind of a new team around him, and like as Marion said, that other team is quite experienced now. So at a dangerous time again in the world, it just might make it a little bit more dangerous. I don't know, but maybe that's too harsh a word, but just a little bit more uncertain.
Okay. All right. Well, fascinating stuff. Couple of things. I'm going to go to two. I'm going to go to two questions that people have put forward. But I just want to remind everyone that there is a poll on here that you can vote. Who do you think will be the next president? And you have choices between Biden, Trump, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., or somebody else. So please participate in the poll. But I want to take two questions that I see here in the chat, one of which is kind of an amalgamation of several questions, and one of which is nice because it'll be a two-word answer from each of you, and we're up against it time-wise. The first one, and I want to start with you, Carole. The first one is because you raised it a minute ago. Are there enough checks and balances in the American system to control Donald Trump if his worst instincts take hold? And I say that in a context where last time around, to my view, the system strained, but at the end of the day, it didn't break.
Okay, gosh, I'm not sure I know enough to answer this one, Larry, but I suppose, the American system as we know it is the president, the Congress, and the courts. And we know that he has enough people on the courts to overturn Roe v. Wade. So if he there may be other things he wants to do there, but that I wouldn't I wouldn't bank that the courts wouldn't be with him on whatever he wants to do. And then on Congress, I think that's probably the harder one, because I suppose we don't know who's going to be up in the House and in the Senate. So I think maybe there are some checks and balances there. Within the people around the president himself, I would be less confident of that, but only looking at what I saw the last time and the team that were there the last time. They didn't seem to have massive influence on him, although I think John could probably disabuse me of that notion fairly quickly. But I would be a little bit worried, yes, that he would be able to achieve whatever it was he wanted.
Okay. John, quickly.
Well, listen, I think the number one thing that there's a check and balance on Trump outside of the well-known institutions, Supreme Court, Congress, and the states, is the fact that he's only going to be a one-term president. And I think that there'll be an effort by folks in the Senate and the House to run out the clock on the Trump administration, delay everything. And it's notoriously difficult to get sweeping legislation passed through the Congress anyway. And from an administrative standpoint, he can only do so much. And I think that looking at the Senate leadership, they are not only for Trump, but they're I'm talking about the Republicans now, but they don't love Trump. And I think there'll be a good deal of resistance. Also, I think there'll be a resistance in the military and the media. So I think this idea of Donald Trump as authoritarian is overstated and alarmist. I'm not that worried about it. And I also think that Trump is not particularly clever when it comes to understanding the constitutional system and how laws get made. And you saw that when he tried to repeal Obamacare. He just really didn't have an appreciation for how to get that passed. One thing that he does have a great opportunity to deal with is we have a bunch of tax cuts that are expiring in the end of the first term, and he'll have an opportunity to kind of reshape much of how we tax in this country, because otherwise there'll be a $3 trillion automatic tax increase. So that does give him an understanding of that. But I feel fairly confident that the institutions will hold. And he doesn't. While he appointed the Supreme Court, I don't think anyone really believes that John Roberts or several of the members of the Supreme Court who are Republican, even Brett Kavanaugh, are going to do what Trump wants. I think their first concern is not loyalty to Trump, but to the Constitution and to the legal system. And I feel fairly confident that our institutions will hold.
Marion, quickly.
Okay, well, on the checks and balances, I'm going to disagree with you there, John, about the Supreme Court, because they're doing Trump's bidding as we speak in slow walking this appeal on presidential immunity, when this is something a first-day law student could figure out for themselves. There is no need for them to turn it into this song and dance that they are. But I think overall, Congress will probably be run by the Democrats, as in the House of Representatives. I think that given what's happened in the last 2 years, I think most people are going to think, you know what, the Democrats actually are not as crazy when they're in the House, when they're in control, as the Republicans. The Senate could go Republican. I think there will be a bigger strain this time. Will American democracy come tumbling down? No, I don't think so. But I think that the damage that could be done in terms of foreign relations, I think the damage that could be done just to the fabric of America, that Carole and I knew from 20 years ago, when it was a country that was pretty united on a lot of things and a good-humored, kind of upbeat, positive country. I don't feel that anymore about America. I feel it's become very sort of depressed in itself, and I don't see either of these leaders kind of cheering it up and being a cheerleader for how great America is without the jingoism or the tribalism. So I think the checks and balances, on balance, the problem is, and I know that Tim Snyder said this, democracies implode from within, and they start to implode when people no longer trust the institutions. A lot of Americans don't trust the Supreme Court anymore, with good reason, because it is a conservative super Senate. We've seen that. They don't trust Congress, they despise Congress, and they really are concerned about the executive. So if you have ordinary Americans no longer trusting these institutions, and that's where democracy starts to implode. And I think if you see the kind of people who are being elected to Congress at the moment, the number of burn it all down people who have been elected, that's something people should be worried about, because these people aren't going to Washington to do good. They're going to Washington to throw a hand grenade into the Beltway. And, you know, why are they being sent there? Is that a reflection of how angry and frustrated Americans are? Probably in some areas. So I would be worried. I wouldn't be doomsday about it, but I'd certainly be worried.
Okay, one last question. As I said, one of my favorite kinds, because there's only 2 words in the answer, and this has been put by a number of audience participants. And I'll start with you, Marion, and work backwards through John and Carole. Who is Donald Trump going to choose as his running mate?
If he was smart, it would be Nikki Haley, but I don't think he could stomach Nikki Haley. He should pick her, and if she went, I think he would probably win quite handily. You know, Elise Stefanik, I mean, I think there's a sense that it probably will be a woman. And it won't be Marjorie Taylor Greene, it won't be Carrie Lake, or it shouldn't be. You know, he can't go, he's already got the crazies in the bag. He doesn't need any more of them. They're all there already. So he needs somebody who will reach out. Now, that's a lot more than 2 words. So honestly, I think, I mean, people are talking Kirsty Noem, maybe, but she's a bit of a Sarah Palin. Honestly, I think Trump being Trump, he's going to string this out like an apprentice contest. It will run and run and run, and then it will probably be somebody where we'll go, what's the big deal?
John.
JD Vance.
Interesting.
Ooh.
A lot of buzz about him in conservative circles. Carole.
Haven't a clue. I don't think it's going to be a woman. I think he would have had a woman the first time if he was able to you know, work in that kind of a relationship. The last headline I read was RFK, so I'll go with that one.
I'll give you two. I'll give you 2 words. Someone loyal. That's who it'll be. Someone loyal above all else. Just want to say to Carole, to John, and to Marion, thanks for absolutely marvelous exposition of American politics. We could have done for another hour, but it was just terrific. So thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who tuned in, and thanks to Julie and to Colin for their expert help here. So many thanks to everybody, and you know, keep your seatbelts on for the next few months, because it's going to be a wild ride. Thanks very much.
Certainly is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And thanks for tuning in, everyone. Appreciate it.